thought I had finally figured out what a good life looked like. A house with a real yard. A kid who laughed at my terrible jokes. A woman who made Sunday mornings feel like something worth waking up for. Then my wife's old business partner showed up at a company dinner, put his hand on her back like I was furniture, and I started paying attention to things I'd been too comfortable to notice. My name is Cole Whitfield. I'm 44 years old, and I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Nashville, Tennessee. Not glamorous. Not the kind of job that gets you a corner office with a view, but I'm good at it. I understand load-bearing systems. I know how to tell when something that looks solid is actually one bad storm away from coming apart. Turns out I was better at reading bridges than I was at reading the woman I'd married. Her name is Melissa. We met at a mutual friend's backyard cookout about 5 years ago. She was recently out of a long relationship, raising her 8-year-old daughter Avery, mostly on her own. The ex, a guy named Trent, I'd never met, had drifted out of the picture the way some men do. Slowly at first, then all at once. Weekend visits became once a month, then holidays only, then almost nothing. Avery called him my dad, with the particular flatness that kids use when they're describing something that used to mean more. I fell for Melissa fast. She was sharp and funny, and she had this way of listening to people like they were the only person in the room. Avery warmed up to me slower, which felt right. I didn't push it. I just showed up. I helped with homework. I learned which cartoon characters she cared about. I made pancakes on Saturday mornings with blueberries arranged into smiley faces, which she thought was embarrassing once she turned 9, but secretly still requested. By the time Melissa and I got married 2 years later, Avery had started calling me Dad C, her own invention, short for Dad Cole, and it meant more to me than I knew how to say out loud. The marriage was good. Not perfect, nothing is, but genuinely good. We bought a house in East Nashville with a big porch and a backyard that needed work, which I was happy to provide. Melissa ran a small interior design business out of a studio near Five Points. She was talented, and her client list had been growing steadily. I was proud of her. I told her that, maybe not as often as I should have, but I meant it every time. Then about 14 months ago, a man named Garrett Foss came back into her life. I didn't know much about him at first. Melissa mentioned him casually, an old contact from her early design days, someone who'd helped her land her first commercial project years before we met. He was relocating from Atlanta to Nashville to launch what he called a design and development consulting firm. He'd reached out, asking if she'd be interested in a partnership. She brought it up over dinner one night in a tone that was more casual than the news deserved. I asked a few questions. Was he reputable? Did she trust him? She said yes to both and moved on to talking about Avery's upcoming school play, and I let the subject go. I shouldn't have. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Melissa had never been secretive about it before. She'd leave it on the counter, face up, while she cooked. She'd hand it to me to read directions when I was driving. Then one evening, I walked into the kitchen, and she flipped it over before I could see the screen. Quick, practiced, the kind of move you don't think about because you've been doing it for a while. I told myself I was being paranoid. The second thing was the hours. The business meetings stretched longer. Client calls happened after Avery went to bed. She started driving separately to events she used to ask me to come to. When I did join her, she was distracted in a way I couldn't name. Present but not quite there, laughing a half-second late at jokes, checking her watch when she thought I wasn't looking. Then came the dinner. It was a quarterly gathering for local design and real estate professionals. Melissa had attended before, and I usually skipped it, but she'd asked me to come this time. Said it would be good for people to put a face to the name. I wore a jacket and showed up trying to be supportive. Garrett Foss was already there when we arrived. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who moves through a room like he's already decided he owns it. When he saw Melissa, his whole face changed. He crossed the room and pulled her into a hug that lasted just a beat too long. Then he put his hand on the small of her back. Not a greeting, a claim, and turned to introduce her to the people around him. Not us. Her. I was standing right there, and he introduced her like she'd walked in alone. I extended my hand. He shook it with the particular warmth of someone who doesn't see you as a threat. Nice to finally meet you, he said. Melissa talks about you. He didn't say what she said. Just that she had. We sat at a long table for dinner, and I watched him work the room with one eye and keep tabs on Melissa with the other. He refilled her wine before she asked. He touched her arm when he made a point. At one point, she leaned over to say something in his ear, and they both laughed. And she didn't look at me afterward to share it. That was the part that stayed with me on the drive home. Not the touch, the not looking at me. That night I lay in the dark listening to her breathe and tried to talk myself down. Business partnerships are close. People work long hours together. Friendships form. I was probably reading into body language because I've been watching too carefully, and watching too carefully. Watching too carefully makes you see things that aren't there. But I kept coming back to the same question. When did I start watching that carefully? Something in me had already noticed before I consciously caught up to it. The answer came from Avery, the way it sometimes does when you least expect it. She was doing homework at the kitchen table about a week after the dinner. I was making dinner, half paying attention to her quiet commentary about a worksheet, when she said it. "Dad, see, does Mom's friend Garrett live here now?" I set down the wooden spoon. "What do you mean, Bug?" She shrugged without looking up. "He's here sometimes. When you're at work. Mom said he's helping with business stuff. She said to not mention it because you'd think it was weird." "She said that. She said you'd make it into something." Avery finally lived up, her expression apologetic. "I'm not in trouble for telling you, am I?" "No," I said carefully. "You're not in trouble for anything." I finished making dinner and put a plate in front of her and went to the back porch and stood in the cold for 10 minutes because I needed somewhere for the feeling to go that wasn't the kitchen where my daughter could see it. He'd been in my house while I was at work, and Melissa had told a 9-year-old to stay quiet about it. When Melissa came home that evening, I didn't say anything right away. I waited until Avery was asleep, which is the longest kind of waiting there is. Then I made 2 cups of tea, set one in front of her, and sat down across from her at the kitchen table. "I need you to be honest with me about something," I said. She wrapped her hands around the mug. She didn't ask what about. That told me something. "How often has Garrett been at this house?" Her shoulders dropped half an inch. "Sometimes he works here. We go over plans, samples, mock-ups. It's easier than the studio." "How many times?" A pause. "Maybe 7 or 8. I found out from our daughter." "Were you asked to keep it from me?" "David," she stopped. "Cole, I didn't want you to misread it." "Misread what exactly?" She looked at the table. "The partnership is a real opportunity. Garrett has connections I don't. He can get us into commercial contracts that would take me 10 years to build toward on my own." She raised her eyes. "I knew you'd see it as a threat. I was trying to protect the opportunity. From me." "From your reaction," she said quietly. I sat with that for a moment. "I want to believe you," I said. "But you had our daughter running interference. That's not protecting an opportunity. That's hiding something." Melissa's jaw tightened. "I'm not having an affair, Cole." She said it fast and clean, the way you say something you've rehearsed. Not the way you say something that surprises you to have to say it all. I nodded slowly. "Okay. Then I need Garrett to stop coming to this house." She didn't answer right away. That hesitation. That's when I knew. I didn't sleep well that week. I went to work and ran calculations and came home and helped with homework and made dinner and watched Melissa move through our shared spaces like a woman carrying something she wouldn't put down. She was cordial, careful, the way people are when they're being careful, which is its own kind of alarm. On Thursday, I called an old college friend who worked in family law. Not to start anything, just to understand what I was looking at. He asked me a few questions, and then said quietly and without judgment that I should document everything I could, and that I shouldn't move money around or change any accounts without legal advice first. That call made it real in a way that the dinner and Avery's comment and the bad sleep hadn't quite managed. I started paying attention to our finances. Melissa and I had a joint account that we both drew from for household expenses. I hadn't looked at the statements closely in months. I trusted her, and we'd never had a reason to be cautious with each other. When I pulled up 3 months of statements, I found a pattern of transfers I hadn't noticed individually, but couldn't miss all at once. Small amounts. 300 here, 500 there, moving out of savings into a separate account I didn't have access to. Over 3 months, it totaled just under $11,000. I didn't confront her immediately. I took photographs of the statements and called my lawyer friend again. Then I hired someone, a private investigator named Hal Chen. He was recommended through my lawyer friend as someone methodical and discreet. When he sat across from me in a coffee shop on Gallatin Avenue, and I told him what I knew, he didn't seem surprised by any of it. He asked clear questions, wrote careful notes, and told me he'd be in touch. 11 days later he was. We met at the same coffee shop. Hal ordered a black coffee and slid a folder across the table before he even sat down fully. They'd been seeing each other since before he moved to Nashville, he said. Hotel records from Atlanta, then from here once he relocated. I've got receipts going back 8 months. He turned to the second page. The account she's been transferring into. It's a joint account. His name is on it too. I stared at the page. She's been giving him my money, consolidating it, Hal said, which was a careful way to put it. Building a shared financial base. Whatever they're planning, it wasn't spontaneous. He turned another page and I saw a photo of Melissa and Garrett walking into a hotel downtown. The timestamp was a Tuesday afternoon. I thought she was at a client site visit that day. She texted me a photo of fabric samples to prove it. Hal let me sit with it for a moment. There was one more thing. He folded his hands on the table. Foss has a civil suit pending against him in Fulton County. A former client is alleging he misrepresented his credentials on a commercial project. There's a pattern with this guy. He attaches himself to people with genuine talent and a client base, uses the partnership to access their network and credibility, then exits when it stops being useful. This isn't his first time doing this. I thought about Melissa's clients, her reputation, built carefully over years, everything she'd worked for. Is she in legal exposure? I asked. Depends on how deep her name is tied to his. Hal leaned back. I'd get a lawyer to look at the business documents. I drove home and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes. Avery was inside. I could see the light in her room. She'd asked me a few nights ago if Mom and I were fighting because we'd been quieter than usual, and she said she could feel it. I'd told her that sometimes adults had hard conversations, but that she didn't need to worry. She'd looked at me with the steady, knowing eyes that kids get when they've been watching closely and said, "Okay, but I'm going to worry anyway." I asked her to come downstairs and asked Melissa to be there too. I needed to do this with Avery present because Avery was the reason any of this mattered. Garrett arrived 10 minutes after Melissa texted him. I'd asked her to call him. She didn't know I knew what I knew. She thought she was walking into a conversation about the partnership. When Garrett walked through my front door into my living room and saw the folder on the coffee table, something shifted in his expression. Fast, practiced, then smooth again. He sat down and looked at Melissa and then at me and said, "Cole? I think there may be some misunderstandings here worth talking through." Avery was sitting next to me on the couch. She'd wanted to hold my hand and I'd let her. "I don't think there are any misunderstandings," I said. "I think you came to Nashville with a plan and Melissa was part of it. And I think you've been using her talent and her client base to rebuild your reputation while you're being sued in Georgia for exactly that." Garrett's expression didn't break, but something went tight behind his eyes. "Cole," Melissa said, her voice low, "please let me explain." I turned to her. "I know about the hotel. I know about the account. I know it's been 8 months, and I know the transfers total $11,000. My lawyer knows too." She went white. Garrett put his hands on his knees and shifted forward like he was about to stand up. He had the energy of a man who was used to controlling the temperature of a room. "Listen," he started. I stood up first. "You put your hands on my wife at that dinner like I wasn't even there. You came into my home while I was at work, and you asked my daughter to keep it secret. You've been taking money from my family's savings account. So I'm going to need you to hear me clearly right now." He went still. "I'm not asking you what your intentions were. I don't actually care. What I care about is that starting tonight you have no further contact with my wife, no access to any account my name is connected to, and no further involvement in any business where Melissa's name and reputation are on the line. My attorney will be sending a detailed letter to yours about the financial matter." And I forwarded Hal's documentation to the attorney handling the Fulton County case, because they should probably know where you relocated. The room was very quiet. Avery looked up at me. She didn't say anything. She just tightened her hand in mine. Garrett looked at Melissa. She looked at the floor. That was when I understood. She wasn't choosing him in that moment. She was sitting with what she'd done, and the weight of it was more than she could hold upright. After Garrett left, and he left quickly, without another word, the confidence gone from his walk, Avery went upstairs without being asked. She was a perceptive kid. She knew there was more adult talking that needed to happen. Melissa and I sat in the living room for a long time. I asked her when it started. She told me. I asked her what she'd been thinking. She didn't have an answer that satisfied either of us, and I could see she knew it. What she said, eventually, was this: "He made me feel like I was about to become something. Like all the work I'd done was finally going to mean something bigger. I got swept up in it and I made choices I can't undo." I asked her if she loved him. She was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I might," she said. "I don't think I actually know him well enough to know." That was probably the most honest thing she'd said to me in months, and it landed like a stone in still water. I told her I needed her to move to her sister's for a while, not because I'd made a final decision, but because I needed to think without the noise of managing how she was doing sitting on top of everything else. She didn't argue. She packed a bag that night and I heard her stop at Avery's room for a few minutes before she came downstairs and walked out. Avery came to find me after. She stood in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow stars, and looked at me carefully. "Is Mom coming back?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said. That's an honest answer, not a scared one. You know the difference. She thought about it. "Yes," she said. A scared answer would have been, "Of course she is." Exactly. She came and leaned against me, and I put my arm around her, and we stood like that in the kitchen for a while. Not talking, the dishwasher cycling through its last rinse. The weeks that followed were hard in a quiet way. I won't pretend otherwise. I made breakfast for Avery every morning and drove her to school and went to work and came home and made dinner and helped her with her reading log and tried to sleep. Some nights I managed it. Other nights I lay there sorting through the version of my life I thought I was living and the one that had actually been happening, trying to figure out where they diverged. Melissa and I started meeting with a family mediator in the 5th week. Not reconciliation therapy, not divorce proceedings, just a structured space to figure out what we each needed and what was possible. Our first session was mostly silence, with a professional witness. Our second session, she cried and I listened. Our third session, I talked and she listened. It was slow, methodical work, the kind of thing that doesn't resolve itself cleanly or quickly. Garrett Foss disappeared from our lives the way I suspected he always did, efficiently and without looking back. The civil case in Georgia settled. His Nashville firm dissolved before it had fully formed. 2 of Melissa's clients, once they learned there were legal concerns around his credentials, quietly declined to move forward with any projects he'd been attached to. Melissa was shaken by this, but she was also relieved. Getting distance from him clarified what he'd actually been, and it wasn't what he'd sold himself as. The money issue was resolved through the mediator. Melissa repaid the account in full from her business assets. She didn't fight it. I thought that mattered. On a Wednesday evening in March, about 4 months after the night I'd asked Garrett to leave my house, I was sitting on the back porch after Avery went to bed. It was cold but bearable. The kind of cold that wakes you up rather than shutting you down. My phone buzzed with a text from Avery, who I could hear moving around upstairs. "Dad, see. I know you're on the porch. Don't stay out too late. It's a school night for both of us." I laughed out loud. Actually laughed, which surprised me. I texted back, "Who told you school nights applied to adults?" Her response, "You did, last October. Payback." I put the phone in my pocket and sat with the quiet for a while. I won't tell you that things resolved the way I'd hoped. I don't know yet if Melissa and I will rebuild what we had. We're still in that uncertain middle space where the outcome isn't fixed and the work is genuinely hard. And some days it feels possible and other days it doesn't. What I know is that whatever happens between the 2 of us, Avery is steady. She knows she's loved by someone who isn't going anywhere. She knows that the person who shows up for her on weekday mornings and reads over her homework and sits on the bleachers at her soccer games chose to be there and makes that choice every single day. She told me something last week that I've been turning over since. We were in the car on the way home from soccer practice, and she was looking out the window and she said, "Dad, see. I think the reason I wasn't that scared when things got hard is because I never once thought you'd leave. I kept my eyes on the road because I didn't trust my face right then. You were right not to be scared," I said. "I know," she said simply, and turned back to the window. There's a particular kind of strength that comes from being tested by something you didn't choose and surviving it without becoming smaller. I don't feel wise or victorious. I feel like a man who paid attention when it finally mattered, who protected his kid, who told the truth in a room where it was easier to avoid it, and who's still standing. Some mornings I make blueberry pancakes with the smiley faces. Avery still pretends she's too old for them. She still eats everyone. That's enough. For now, it's enough. I've spent a lot of time since all this happened, thinking about what I actually missed and when I missed it. Not in a self-punishing way, I'm past that, but in the way you review a structure after a stress event to understand where the load was distributed wrong. That's the engineer in me. I want to know where the failure point was. Not to blame myself for it, but so I understand what I'm working with. Here's what I came back to. I stopped paying attention because things felt stable, and stability, when you've worked hard to build something, can quietly become an excuse not to look too closely. I trusted the surface because I'd helped lay it. That's not weakness. It's a reasonable thing to do, but it meant that when the cracks started forming, I wasn't watching for them until Avery, a 9-year-old in star pajamas, handed me the truth I'd been walking past for months. That's the part I sit with. Not what Melissa did, not what Garrett was. Those things are what they are, and people make choices and live with them. What I sit with is the reminder that caring about something isn't the same as watching over it. You can love a person completely and still stop seeing them clearly. Attention is its own form of respect, and I'd let mine go passive. What I did right, and I'll give myself this, is that when I finally saw it, I didn't flinch away from it. I didn't negotiate with what was in front of me, or talk myself into a softer version of the truth, because the truth was inconvenient. I looked at Hal's folder and I looked at the bank statements, and I let them mean what they meant. That took something, not bravery exactly, more like a decision that my daughter deserved a father who dealt in reality, even when reality was hard. Avery taught me something through all of this without meaning to. She said she was never scared because she never thought I'd leave. I keep turning that over. What she was describing wasn't my strength, or my income, or any particular thing I did. She was describing consistency. Showing up, repeatedly, without drama, without conditions. That's what she built her sense of safety on. Not a promise I'd made once, but a pattern she'd observed over years. And that pattern, it's the only thing that held when everything else went unstable. Garrett Foss had charm, connections, money, a confident walk. He had everything that looks like power from a distance. What he didn't have was a 9-year-old who trusted him in the bones, because you can't manufacture that. You earn it slowly and you can lose it fast, and there are no shortcuts and no substitutes. The choices we make compound. The good ones and the bad ones both. Garrett made a career out of attaching himself to people who had genuinely built something and using it for himself. And that pattern eventually ran out of road. Melissa let herself get pulled by something that looked like an opportunity and turned out to be neither. I stayed present for a kid who needed me to, and she grew up knowing her foundation was solid. None of those outcomes were accidents. They were the accumulated weight of repeated decisions, pressing down until the structure either held or it didn't. Mine held. I intend to keep it that way.